There's so much thinking around human decision making. We have Dr. Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which looks at system 1 and system 2. There's so much thinking around decision making, which is so fantastic and has really sparked this interest in me as to how we can start looking at organizations, corporate schools, doesn't really matter, and seeing them as a series of decisions that are made and then decisions based on those decisions. And instead of trying to pigeonhole bias in recruitment or bias in work allocation or bias in promotion or dismissal, we just understand that it's actually just decisions that are being made. So how can we focus on how we make decisions to influence, or rather to eliminate, bias in our systems? So decision making for me is so important and such an interesting concept. Today I want to talk, so for me there's two elements of decision making. There's me making the decision, and the second element is the system that is influencing me, or the organization that is influencing my decision making. Today we're focusing on me, the individual, the decision maker, right? So if we think of the decision here, right, this is the decision that I've made or going to make. What influences this decision for me are the things that we find safe, familiar, valuable, and likable. I am going to make decisions that on things that I find safe, familiar, valuable, and likable. So the decision that I'm making is being determined by the things that I find safe, familiar, valuable, likable. But where do these come from? For me, these come from our history, from our past, that we have been taught who or what is safe, who is familiar, who's valuable, and who's likable. And in a country like South Africa, in the world that we live in, men historically have been seen as safe, familiar, valuable, likable. White people have been seen as safe, familiar, valuable, likable. Heterosexual people, able-bodied people, English-speaking have been seen as safe, familiar, valuable, and likable. So when we can understand that we have been taught what is and who is safe, familiar, valuable, likable, we then understand that the things that we find safe, familiar, valuable, likable aren't our own, but come from our history. And really that our decision making is determined by our history, that we are not these agnostic, objective people making our own decisions. No, we've been influenced by a system of exclusion and oppression. So what am I saying? We're not necessarily going to raise these systems, but how do we recognize that our decision making is influenced by our past, particularly in South Africa, and then understand, or rather create spaces where we can create more information to allow us to make more informed decisions, right? So how do we create more information on what is safe, familiar, valuable, likable in order for us to make more informed decisions? How do we do that? Bringing diversity around the table, different opinions, bringing in, asking for people to tell us what they find safe, familiar, valuable, and likable, which is going to give us more information to allow us to make a more informed decision. So this is really just talking about decision making, and that me as the decision maker, I'm going to make decisions based on what I find safe, familiar, valuable, likable. The things I find safe, familiar, valuable, likable have been determined historically, and in order for me to interrupt that or to create more spaces to find more things safe, familiar, valuable, likable, how do I get more information around me, more people to help inform my decision making process? So tomorrow we're going to chat about the system and how the system also reinforces that which we find safe, familiar, valuable, and likable.